I'm Victoria, 28, and I just witnessed my dad burn a check for $38 million in front of our whole family. I'll never forget the pure hate on his face as he torched the fortune my grandfather Maxwell left me. But I just sat there, smiling, which confused everyone even more. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments, subscribe, and tell me if family has ever betrayed you while someone else had your back completely. Growing up, a Grant meant something in our town. My grandfather, Maxwell Grant, built Grant Enterprises from scratch with sheer determination and brilliant business sense. Others saw the mansion and luxury cars, but I saw the man who'd take me for ice cream every Sunday, listening to my dreams as if they were the most important things in the world. Victoria, success isn't about what you have, he'd tell me, licking his double scoop of mint chocolate chip. It's about creating something meaningful that outlasts you. Even at 7, I'd nod seriously, chocolate dripping down my cone. Those Sundays were sacred. We'd walk through the botanical gardens he funded, and he'd teach me about every flower and tree. Sometimes we'd sit on our bench for hours, and he'd tell stories about starting his business in a tiny office with just 2 employees. He'd quiz me on business concepts I shouldn't have understood at that age, but somehow did. My father, Richard, on the other hand, was a complicated shadow in my life. As my grandfather's only son, he had everything handed to him: the best schools, connections, startup capital for his ventures. Yet nothing was ever enough. His businesses would flourish briefly under my grandfather's guidance, then collapse when he ignored advice and made impulsive decisions. I remember hiding at the top of the stairs when I was 12, listening to my father scream at my grandfather in the study below. "Nothing I do is ever good enough for you," he'd shouted, the smell of whiskey reaching me. "You give me these opportunities just to watch me fail." "Richard, I give you opportunities because you're my son," my grandfather replied evenly. "But you sabotage yourself every time. The Westlake deal collapsed because you didn't read the contract thoroughly, not because I set you up to fail." "And I suppose Victoria would have read it perfectly," my father spat. "Your precious granddaughter, who can do no wrong." That's when I first understood his resentment of me, not just for having my grandfather's attention, but for having his respect. My mother, Diana, tried her best to bridge these troubled waters. A former art curator who'd fallen in love with the charming son of a business magnate, she hadn't signed up for our family's level of dysfunction. Still, she was the glue that kept holiday dinners from exploding into all-out war. "Your father loves you," she'd whisper, after he missed another school play or swim meet. "He just doesn't know how to show it properly." I'd nod, but even then, I knew the difference between absence and avoidance. Mother had a cordial relationship with my grandfather. He respected her intelligence and taste, consulting her on art acquisitions for the company and inviting her to cultural events. It was clear he thought his son had married up, which only fueled my father's resentment. When my father's drinking worsened during my teen years, my mother shielded me from the worst of it. She'd send me to stay with my grandfather when my father went on benders. Those weekends at my grandfather's lake house became another sanctuary where I could breathe without the suffocating tension of my parents' home. My education choices became another battleground. My father insisted I pursue liberal arts, something suitable for a society wife, he'd say dismissively. My grandfather never pushed me either way, but asked thoughtful questions about my interests and aptitudes. When I chose business school, my father didn't speak to me for months. "Following in the old man's footsteps," he sneered at Thanksgiving dinner that year. How original. What both of them failed to realize was that I made my choice independently. I had a natural affinity for business strategy and economics, discovering this through school projects and my own reading. The fact that it aligned with my grandfather's field was coincidental, though admittedly his stories had sparked my initial curiosity. After graduation, I shocked everyone by declining my grandfather's offer to join Grant Enterprises. Instead, I took an entry-level position at Madison Financial, a competitor firm. "I need to know I can succeed on my own terms," I explained to my grandfather over our Sunday ice cream, a tradition we maintained even as adults. He smiled with pride. "That's exactly why you'd be perfect at Grant, but I respect your decision. Victoria, forge your own path." What I didn't know then was that my grandfather kept tabs on my career through industry connections. Every promotion I earned, every project I successfully led, he knew about it all, collecting newspaper clippings and industry newsletter mentions of my accomplishments. My brother Alex took a different approach to family dynamics. 2 years younger than me, he aligned himself with our father early on, perhaps seeing it as the path of least resistance. Where I challenged my father's dismissive attitude, Alex mirrored it. Where I worked for my achievements, Alex leveraged the family name. "You're making everything harder than it needs to be," Alex told me after I refused to let him connect me with one of my father's business associates for a shortcut promotion. "Why climb the ladder when you can take the elevator?" "Because I want to know every step," I replied. "And so when I reach the top, no one can question how I got there." The final fracture between us came just 3 months before my grandfather fell ill. Alex had been caught using company resources for personal expenses at the small division of Grant Enterprises that my father had helped him secure. When I refused to cover for him during the internal audit, he accused me of betrayal. "Family protects family," he hissed in the hospital parking lot after visiting our grandfather. "Not when it means compromising my integrity," I replied, "and not when it harms the company grandfather built." "Always the perfect granddaughter," he sneered. "Must be nice to be the favorite." I watched him storm off, wondering when we had become such strangers. The truth was, I never asked to be anyone's favorite. I just wanted to be myself, to earn my own way. If that aligned with my grandfather's values more than my father's, it wasn't a strategic choice. It was just who I was. Little did I know then how these family fractures would soon crack wide, open with $38 million reasons for the final breaking point. The call came on a rainy Tuesday morning in October. I was preparing for a crucial presentation when my phone lit up with my mother's number. "Victoria, it's grandfather. You should come to the hospital right away." My presentation forgotten, I rushed across town to St. Mary's Medical Center. My grandfather had suffered a severe stroke. At 84, he was still mentally sharp as ever, but his body had been failing him gradually over the past year. That first day in the hospital established a pattern. I would arrive early before work, then return after and stay until visiting hours ended. Mother came regularly, bringing flowers and books. Father and Alex made appearances that grew more frequent and longer as days passed and doctors confirmed grandfather's condition was unlikely to improve. "The vultures are circling," grandfather whispered to me one evening, nodding toward the door where father and my Uncle Philip had just exited after a suddenly solicitous visit. "Don't talk like that," I said, adjusting his pillows. "Focus on getting stronger." His blue eyes, still bright despite his weakened state, fixed on mine. "Victoria, I've built an empire by seeing things clearly. Let me see this clearly too." During those 3 weeks, the hospital room became a revolving door of family members who hadn't visited my grandfather in years. Second cousins, distant nieces and nephews, even his sister-in-law Margaret, who had once accused him of cheating her husband in a business deal decades ago. I overheard conversations in the hallway, poorly disguised discussions of after and arrangements, and the estate. My father began bringing paperwork for my grandfather to review, claiming they were time-sensitive business matters, though my grandfather had officially retired 5 years earlier. "He's trying to secure his position," grandfather told me during one of our private moments. Richard always did panic when he felt uncertain. On a particularly difficult night, when the doctors were concerned about grandfather's dropping oxygen levels, he asked the nurses to give us privacy. Once we were alone, he reached for my hand with surprising strength. "Victoria, I need you to know something. I've always seen everyone clearly, Richard, Alex, all of them. Their motivations, their weaknesses, and yours too." "Me?" I asked. "Your strength, your integrity, how you've never once asked me for anything, even when I would have given you everything."
He paused to catch his breath. "I've made 2 plans.
Richard will fight the first one. Let him think he's won. "Grandfather, I don't understand. Plans for what?" "For setting things right. For making sure my legacy continues the way I intended." He squeezed my hand. "Promise me you'll trust the process, even when it seems like everything's falling apart. I promised, though I didn't understand what he meant. Later that night, I overheard Father and Uncle Philip in the hall. Maxwell's always been traditional about these things, Uncle Philip was saying. The company will go to you as his son. It had better, Father replied. I've put up with his criticism for decades. It's my turn now. The next morning, Grandfather asked to speak with his attorney, Gerald Winters, alone. The meeting lasted nearly 2 hours, and when I returned, Grandfather seemed at peace. It's all settled now, he said with a small smile. Now we can just enjoy the time we have left. For the next few days, that's exactly what we did. I brought photo albums from his house, and we reminisced about family vacations, company milestones, and those countless Sunday ice cream outings. Sometimes he'd drift to sleep mid-conversation, but he always woke with a smile when he saw me still sitting there. On the final night, something felt different. The room was quieter somehow, as if the world outside had already begun to recede. I sat holding his hand, occasionally dabbing his forehead with a cool cloth. Victoria, he said suddenly, his voice clearer than it had been in days. Remember when you were 10 and fell off the dock at the lake house? I nodded, surprised he was thinking of that now. You didn't cry. You were bleeding, scared of the water back then, but you didn't cry. You just got up, let your grandmother bandage your knee, and went right back out there an hour later. I wanted to prove I wasn't afraid, I said. No, you wanted to prove to yourself that falling didn't define you. That's rare. His eyes drifted to the window where dawn was just beginning to light the sky. Use that quality in the days ahead. Those were the last coherent words he spoke to me. I was alone with him when he passed peacefully the next morning, just as the sun broke over the horizon. The family's performance at the funeral was exactly as expected. Father, suddenly the grieving son who had allegedly been so close to the deceased. Alex, the grandson who had learned so much from his grandfather. Aunt Judith, dabbing dry eyes with a handkerchief while whispering about the reception catering. I stood apart from them, my grief real and raw. Maxwell Grant hadn't just been my grandfather. He'd been my mentor, my friend, the parent figure who had always believed in me. The only person who seemed to share my genuine sorrow was Gerald Winters, who stood respectfully at the back of the funeral service, his own eyes suspiciously red. Your grandfather was one of a kind, he told me at the reception. They truly don't make them like that anymore. In the days that followed, Father became increasingly anxious about the will reading scheduled for the following Friday. I overheard him on the phone with his financial advisor, making plans for how to restructure certain assets. By this time next week, we'll have everything sorted, he assured Alex over dinner 3 days before the reading. The company shares alone are worth more than $200 million. We'll need to consolidate immediately. Mother caught my eye across the table, her expression unreadable. Later, she came to my room as I was preparing to leave. Victoria, whatever happens on Friday, remember that money changes people and sometimes reveals who they truly were all along. I nodded, thinking she was warning me about Father and Alex. Only later would I realize she might have been warning me about myself as well. The night before the reading, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my balcony looking at the stars, thinking about all those lessons Grandfather had taught me about value, about worth, about what really matters in the end. It's not about the money, I whispered to the night sky. It was never about the money. With that thought, I finally found peace enough to sleep, unaware of the storm that awaited us all the next morning. Grandfather's study had always been an impressive room with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, leather furniture, and the massive oak desk where he built his empire one contract at a time. Now, with 14 family members crammed into it, the space felt smaller, almost claustrophobic. Father positioned himself in Grandfather's chair, a presumptuous move that drew a subtle frown from Gerald Winters. Mother sat beside him, elegant in simple black, her face a practiced neutral. Alex slouched against the bookcase, attempting casual disinterest, but betrayed by his constantly checking his watch. Aunt Judith and Uncle Philip sat stiffly on the leather sofa, while cousins Rachel, Thomas, and Stephanie perched awkwardly on chairs brought in from the dining room. Grandfather's sister Florence, now 86, occupied the room's only armchair, her nurse standing vigilantly behind her. I chose a spot by the window, slightly removed from the others. The morning sun warmed my back as Gerald arranged his documents on the desk, gently asking Father to vacate the chair so he could conduct the proceedings properly. "Before we begin," Gerald said once everyone had settled, "I want to clarify that Maxwell was of completely sound mind when he made these arrangements, with 2 independent physicians confirming his cognitive clarity. These documents have been properly executed according to state law with all appropriate witnesses." He looked pointedly at Father as he added, "They are legally binding and incontestable." Father's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Gerald began with the smaller bequests, $10,000 to each of the household staff who had served Grandfather for over 5 years. $100,000 to his alma mater for a scholarship fund.
His collection of rare books to the city library.
To my sister Florence, Gerald read, "I leave my summer home in Cape Cod and annuity of $75,000 annually for the remainder of her life." Aunt Florence nodded, unsurprised. She and Grandfather had remained close throughout their lives. "To my nephews and nieces," Gerald continued, "I leave $25,000 each, with an additional $50,000 to any who complete a 4-year college degree." Cousins Rachel and Thomas exchanged glances, while Stephanie stared at her hands. "To my son Richard's wife, Diana," Gerald's voice softened slightly, "I leave my collection of 19th century art, which she has always appreciated more deeply than anyone else in the family, along with $500,000 to be used at her discretion." Mother's composure slipped momentarily, her eyes widening before she quickly regained control. Father's hand moved to rest possessively on her knee. "To my grandson, Alexander," Gerald continued, "I leave $1 million to be held in trust until his 35th birthday, with quarterly distributions of interest only until that time. Additionally, I leave him my vintage car collection, with the stipulation that none of the vehicles may be sold for a period of 10 years. Alex straightened up, his expression a mix of satisfaction and calculation. $1 million was substantial, but clearly less than he'd expected. Gerald paused, taking a sip of water, before continuing. The room had grown tense, everyone aware that the major assets, the company's shares, the primary estate, and the bulk of liquid assets remained unaddressed. "Regarding Grant Enterprises," Gerald said, causing Father to lean forward eagerly, "the company which I built from nothing, and which has been my life's work." Father was practically hovering above his seat. "Now, I have determined that 51% of voting shares will be placed in a trust with specific directives for company management to be followed by the trustees, the remaining 49% of shares." Here it was. Father's hands were actually trembling. "Are hereby bequeathed to my granddaughter, Victoria Grant." The room went completely silent. I felt everyone's eyes turn to me, but I kept my gaze on Gerald, sure I had misheard. "The bulk of my liquid assets, property holdings, and investments, totaling approximately $38 million, are also bequeathed to Victoria with the following condition. Victoria must demonstrate continued financial responsibility for a period of 1 year, during which time these assets will be managed by the executors of my estate. After this period, assuming the condition is met, Victoria will receive full control." Father's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "This is preposterous," he exploded, standing so abruptly his chair crashed backward. "I am his son, his only son. I worked alongside him for 30 years. Gerald remained calm. "If you'll allow me to finish, Richard, there is a specific message from your father regarding this decision." "I don't need to hear his excuses," Father was shouting now. "This is manipulation from beyond the grave. He's trying to control us. Even in death." "Richard," Mother said quietly, "please sit down and let Gerald finish." "In explanation of this decision," Gerald continued once Father had grudgingly righted his chair and sat down, "Maxwell left these words. I have watched Victoria develop into a person of integrity, intelligence, and compassion, the 3 qualities most important for proper stewardship of wealth. She has proven herself not by seeking my approval or assets, but by forging her own path and standing by her principles, even when it was difficult. These are the qualities needed to ensure Grant Enterprises continues to thrive and that my legacy is used for positive impact. The silence following these words was deafening. I felt a complex mix of emotions: shock, gratitude, grief, and an overwhelming sense of responsibility. "This is bullshit," Alex finally said. She manipulated him when he was vulnerable. "Victoria barely spent time with him until he got sick," Father added, his voice dangerously low. "Meanwhile, I devoted my life to that company," Gerald sighed. "If I may point out, Richard, according to company records, Victoria visited your father at his office every Friday for lunch throughout her college years and called him weekly, even after taking a job with a different firm. The visitation logs from the hospital also show she spent more time with him during his illness than all other family members combined." Father stood again, this time moving toward the desk where Gerald had placed the symbolic oversized check. "Made out to me for $38 million. A visual representation of the inheritance that would actually be transferred through proper financial channels." "This is not happening," Father said, snatching the check from the desk. "My father was clearly not in his right mind, regardless of what your pet doctors claim." "Richard," Gerald warned, "destroying that check won't change the legal." "But—" Father had already pulled out his lighter, the gold Dunhill that grandfather had given him for his 40th birthday. With a theatrical flourish, he set the corner of the check aflame. "There," he said as the paper curled and blackened. "This is what I think of this farce of a will." Everyone watched in stunned silence as the check burned. Everyone except me. Because while they saw a fortune going up in flames, I remembered grandfather's words: "I've made 2 plans. Richard will fight the first one. Let him think he's won." And so I smiled, a small, quiet smile that seemed to confuse everyone in the room even more than the burning check. "Have you lost your mind?" Alex hissed at me. "He just burned $38 million, Mr. Winters," I said calmly, ignoring my brother. "I believe my grandfather left a video message as well. He mentioned wanting to speak to us all one last time." Father dropped the burning remnants of the check into a waste basket, his moment of triumph already fading as he registered my lack of distress. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. "What video?" Gerald checked his watch. "Yes, there is a video message to be played only after the will reading. I believe now would be the appropriate time." As Gerald set up the laptop and projector, Father's confidence visibly wavered. He looked at me with suspicious eyes, trying to understand why I wasn't devastated by his actions. He would understand soon enough. The family dispersed from grandfather's study in various states of emotional distress. Father stormed out immediately after setting the waste basket on fire, not even staying to watch it burn out completely.
"Alex."
Followed him, throwing me one last confused glance. Mother squeezed my hand gently before leaving with Aunt Florence. The rest trickled out until only Gerald and I remained. "They don't understand why you're so calm," Gerald observed, closing the door behind the last departing relative. "Grandfather told me to trust the process," I replied. "He said there were 2 plans." Gerald nodded, his professional demeanor softening slightly. "Your grandfather was an exceptional man. Brilliant in business, yes, but also an excellent judge of character."
He opened his briefcase again, extracting a sealed envelope. "This is for you, the second plan."
The envelope contained a letter in grandfather's distinctive handwriting and several official-looking documents. "The check your father burned was purely symbolic," Gerald explained as I skimmed the documents. "The actual transfers were executed 2 weeks before your grandfather's passing, with the funds and assets already secured in the appropriate accounts and trusts." I looked up from the papers. So the will reading was a test. "Though perhaps revelation would be a better word," Gerald finished. "Your grandfather wanted to see how everyone would react when faced with his true wishes. And he expected my father to do exactly what he did," I realized.
"He hoped he was wrong," Gerald said gently.
"But yes, he prepared for this outcome. That's why we should watch his video message now, privately, before sharing the appropriate portion with the rest of the family." Later, Gerald set up his laptop on the desk and started the video file. Grandfather's face appeared on screen, recorded in his hospital room, but on a day when he'd been particularly lucid. The sight of him, alert and so unmistakably himself, brought tears to my eyes. "Hello, Victoria," he began, confirming this version was meant for me alone. "If you're watching this privately with Gerald, then Richard has reacted exactly as I feared he would." He sighed deeply. A father never stops hoping his children will rise to their better nature, but I've had to accept that Richard is driven by insecurity and entitlement rather than principle. Grandfather shifted slightly in his hospital bed, his eyes intensely focused on the camera. "The inheritance I've left you is already secured. The documents Gerald has provided detail everything, the accounts, the properties, and your shares in Grant Enterprises. Richard can contest the will all he wants, but he cannot touch what's already been legally transferred." He smiled then, a smile I recognized from countless Sunday conversations. "I didn't build my company by being outmaneuvered, not even by my own son." "Your father will be angry?" Grandfather continued.
He may try to turn family against you. Stand firm.
"The trustees I've appointed to manage the company's operations for the next year are loyal to my vision, not to Richard's ambitions. Use this time to learn everything about the business, if you choose to be involved, though I've structured things so that your financial security is guaranteed regardless." His expression softened. "Victoria, I'm proud of the woman you've become. Your integrity, your work ethic, your compassion. These are the true wealth I'm passing on. The money is just a tool. Use it wisely, use it kindly. And most importantly, use it in a way that brings you fulfillment." The video ended with Grandfather asking Gerald to cue up the family version of the message once I'd had time to process everything. I sat in silence for several minutes after the screen went dark, overwhelmed by both grief and responsibility. "Take your time," Gerald said kindly. "This is a lot to absorb." "He knew," I finally said. "He knew exactly how everyone would behave." "Maxwell had few illusions about people by the end," Gerald agreed. "He'd seen too much in his 84 years. I looked down at the documents again. "So what happens now?" "Now you have decisions to make. But not immediately. The 1-year management period gives you time to consider your options." Gerald handed me a business card. "This is Elaine Hodes, the financial advisor Maxwell selected to help you navigate this transition. She's expecting your call. And what about my father? When will he learn about the second plan?" "That's partly up to you," Gerald said. "The family version of the video explains that the assets have already been transferred, but it doesn't go into detail about the arrangements. You can choose to be transparent about everything now, or you can take some time to secure your position. First, I thought about Father's expression as he burned the check, the triumph in his eyes, the years of dismissal and resentment, the relief he'd felt thinking he'd blocked my inheritance. "I'll take some time," I decided. "Let him think he's won for now," Gerald nodded approvingly. "Your grandfather thought you might say that," he said.
He said, "You understand that sometimes the best business move is patience," after Gerald
Left, I remained in Grandfather's study, running my fingers along the spines of his books, sitting in his chair, absorbing the reality of my new situation. The house was quiet, the family having retreated to process the morning's events. When I finally returned to my apartment that evening, I felt different. Not just because I was now technically one of the wealthiest young women in the city, but because I carried the weight of Grandfather's trust in me, his belief that I would make good decisions, his confidence that I would honor his legacy. I poured a single glass of Grandfather's favorite scotch, a ritual he'd initiated on my 25th birthday, and raised it to his memory. "I promise to make you proud," I whispered to the empty room. "Not of what I have, but of what I do with it." That night I didn't call anyone. I didn't celebrate. I sat with my thoughts, making mental lists of priorities and principles that would guide my next steps. I thought about Father, about Alex, about Mother, about the company employees whose livelihoods were now partially my responsibility. By morning, I had the beginnings of a plan, not just for managing the inheritance, but for handling the family fallout that was surely coming. Grandfather had given me more than wealth. He'd given me time, security, and the confidence of his belief. In me, now I needed to prove that his faith was justified. The week following the will reading unfolded exactly as I'd anticipated. Father avoided me completely, not even acknowledging my presence when we passed in the hallway of the family home where I'd come to collect some personal items. Alex alternated between cold silence and cutting remarks about undeserved handouts. Mother alone maintained normalcy, though strain showed around her eyes. He's meeting with lawyers, she confided during a quick lunch on Wednesday. 3 different firms so far. He's convinced he can overturn the will. Is that what you want? I asked her directly. She stirred her tea thoughtfully. What I want is for this family to heal, but I don't think that's possible until certain truths are faced. She met my eyes. Your father has been living in your grandfather's shadow his entire life. Now he'll have to live in yours too. That won't be easy for him. I nodded, understanding her meaning. Father's pride had always been his weakness, and now it was being tested in the most painful way possible. What none of them knew, what Gerald and I had agreed to keep private temporarily, was that while Father was meeting with lawyers who would ultimately disappoint him, I was meeting with Elaine Hodes and the trustee's grandfather had appointed. I was learning about the true extent of the family business, its operations, challenges, and opportunities. Maxwell was concerned about several recent decisions Richard pushed through the board. Elaine explained during our second meeting, showing financial projections that looked troublingly unstable. The Westridge acquisition particularly worried him. The company took on significant debt, and the revenue projections appear optimistic, meaning fabricated. I translated. Meaning someone should verify the numbers independently, Elaine corrected. Diplomatically? By Friday, rumors of an imminent audit began circulating through Grant Enterprises. I heard about it not from family but from Janet Spencer, grandfather's former executive assistant, who called me directly. Victoria, something's happening at the office. External auditors arrived this morning without prior notice. Your father is not handling it well. I thanked her for the information, unsurprised. The trustees had mentioned their intention to conduct a thorough review of the company's finances. What I hadn't expected was how quickly Father's carefully constructed facade would begin crumbling. The family dinner that Sunday was a masterclass in tension. Father arrived late, disheveled and smelling faintly of whiskey. Alex kept checking his phone nervously. Mother maintained pleasant conversation about nothing important, a skill she'd perfected over decades of family dysfunction. So, Father finally said, setting down his fork with excessive force. I suppose you've heard about the audit. I met his gaze steadily. I've heard rumors, he repeated, his laugh bitter. Is that what we're calling it when the trustees your grandfather appointed start tearing apart everything I've built? Did you build it, though? The words left my mouth before I could reconsider, years of suppressed frustration finally finding voice. Or did grandfather build it, and you just took credit? Alex inhaled sharply. Mother closed her eyes briefly. You know nothing about business. Father spat. Nothing about what it takes to run a company of that size. You've been playing at career with your entry-level position while I've kept Grant Enterprises profitable for decades. Have you? I asked quietly, because the preliminary audit doesn't suggest that's true. His face paled. What do you know about the audit results? I said nothing, letting his imagination fill the silence. This is your doing, he accused. Somehow you've orchestrated this whole thing. Turned the trustees against me. Richard, Mother interjected. Victoria couldn't possibly have, couldn't she? He turned on Mother now. She's been manipulating the old man for years. All those private lunches, those weekend visits. She was playing the long game while we thought she was just being sentimental. The unfairness of his accusations stung, but I kept my expression neutral. I loved him, that's all. Oh, save it, Alex jumped in. We all know you were his favorite. Now you've got everything and we're left with scraps. $1 million is hardly scraps, Alex, I pointed out. It is compared to $38 million plus half the company, he shot back. The company that's currently under audit for financial irregularities, I reminded him. Maybe you should be grateful your trust is separate from the corporate assets. Father's expression changed then, calculation replacing anger. You know, he said slowly, this audit could damage the company's reputation. Stock prices could fall. Your inheritance might not be worth as much as you think. Is that a threat? I asked. It's a reality, he replied. Unless someone steps in to manage the situation. Someone with experience handling corporate crisis. And there was the pivot to self-interest I'd been expecting. Father wasn't concerned about the company or its employees. He was concerned about leveraging whatever influence he still had. The audit will proceed, I said firmly. Grandfather wanted transparency, and so do I. Then you're a fool, Father snapped. This company operates in the real world, not in some idealistic fantasy where everything is above board. There are arrangements, understandings, ways of doing business that won't look good under a microscope. I leaned forward. Are you admitting to improper business practices, Father? He realized his mistake immediately. Don't twist my words. I'm talking about the normal complexities of running a global enterprise, something you know nothing about. But I'm learning, I replied calmly, very quickly. The conversation deteriorated from there, ending with Father storming out and Alex following after, throwing me one last resentful glare. Mother and I sat in the aftermath, the elegant dining room suddenly too large, too quiet.
He's afraid,
She said finally. He's terrified of being exposed. As what? I asked. She met my eyes directly. As less than what your grandfather was, less than what you might become. The following week brought the first real crisis. The audit had uncovered significant discrepancies in the Westridge acquisition, and the board called an emergency meeting. Father still technically the CEO, though with reduced authority under the new trust arrangement, was required to explain the financial projections that had justified the purchase. I attended as a major shareholder, sitting quietly in the back, while Father presented increasingly convoluted explanations for the numbers that simply didn't add up. The board members, many of them grandfather's longtime associates, exchanged concerned glances. Mr. Grant, said Howard Sullivan, the audit committee chair, these revenue projections exceed industry standards by nearly 40%. What data supports this level of optimism? Father shuffled through his papers. The proprietary technology Westridge was developing promised significant market advantages. The technology that third-party evaluators have now deemed commercially unviable, Howard pressed. The meeting continued in this vein for hours, with Father's explanations growing thinner and more defensive. By the end, it was clear to everyone present that the acquisition had been a serious misstep, possibly driven by factors beyond sound business judgment. As we were leaving, Alex approached me in the parking garage, his expression different than I'd seen recently, less hostile, more concerned. That was bad in there, he said, glancing around to ensure we were alone. Yes, it was, I agreed. Did you know? Before today, I studied my brother's face, trying to gauge his sincerity. I knew there were problems. I didn't know the extent. He nodded, running a hand through his hair in a gesture reminiscent of grandfather. Dad's been drinking more. Lot more since before grandfather died, actually. I'm not surprised, I said. He made some bad calls. Alex admitted, the Westridge deal. He pushed it through because the owner is his golf buddy. The guy was desperate to sell, and Dad wanted to help him out. That's not how the business decisions should be made, I said. I know that, Alex replied. Surprising me. I always knew that. It was easier to go along. We stood in awkward silence for a moment. Victoria, I know we haven't been close, especially lately, but I'm worried about what happens next. If the full audit results become public, the company could suffer. I finished for him. I know, not just the company. Dad could face serious consequences. Some of these decisions border on, well, fraud. The word hung between us, heavy. With implication. What are you asking me to do, Alex? I said finally. I don't know, he admitted. I just thought maybe you and I could talk without the shouting and accusations, figure out a way forward that doesn't destroy everything. I considered his offer, searching for manipulation, but finding what seemed like genuine concern. Oh, think about it, I said. but I won't cover up wrongdoing. That's not what grandfather would want. I know, Alex said quietly. That's probably why he left everything to you instead of me. You always stood your ground, even when it was hard. As he walked away, I wondered if this might be the first step toward healing at least one family relationship. But the larger storm was still brewing, and father was at its center. The next day, the preliminary audit results were distributed to board members and major shareholders. The findings were worse than even I had anticipated. Beyond the Westridge acquisition, there were patterns of mismanagement, self-dealing, and potentially fraudulent financial reporting spanning the past 5 years, all under father's leadership. My phone rang that evening. Father's name flashed. On the screen, after a moment's hesitation, I answered. We need to talk, he said without preamble. Not over the phone. Come to the house tomorrow, 10 a.m. I'll be there, I agreed, curious about what approach he would take. When I arrived the next morning, I was surprised to find not just father, but mother and Alex as well, seated in the living room like an intervention. Father looked haggard, his usual polished appearance giving way to someone older, more vulnerable than I'd ever seen him. The audit report is damning, he began without preamble. If these findings go public, Grant Enterprises, stock will plummet. Contracts will be lost. There could be regulatory investigations. I nodded, waiting. You have the power to stop this, he continued. As the primary shareholder, you can direct the trustees to handle this internally, quietly. Why would I do that? I asked. Because despite everything, we're family, Mother said softly. And because there are 5,000 employees who don't deserve to suffer for mistakes they didn't make. It was a good point, one I'd been considering myself. The employees were innocent parties in this situation. What about accountability? I asked, looking directly at Father. The audit shows years of mismanagement. That can't simply be ignored. I'm not saying there shouldn't be changes, Father replied, surprising me. I'm saying those changes don't have to come with public humiliation and potential criminal charges. What kind of changes are you suggesting? I pressed. Father took a deep breath, clearly struggling with what he was about to say. I would step down as CEO, transition to an advisory role with no direct authority over financial decisions. Alex leaned forward. I've been talking with Dad about this. We could bring in an interim CEO from outside, someone with a strong reputation for corporate governance. Show shareholders and partners that we're serious about reform. I looked between them, sensing there was more, and we would need capital to address the Westridge situation, Father admitted. The company is over-leveraged because of that acquisition. We need to either invest more to make the technology viable or write it off as a loss and restructure the debt. So you need my money to fix your mistake, I clarified. I need your help to save the company our grandfather built, Father countered, his voice rising slightly before he visibly reined himself in. Victoria, I know we've had our differences. I know I haven't always been the father you deserved, but this isn't about me or you or even Maxwell anymore. It's about preserving what he created. I studied him, looking for the manipulation, the angle. But all I saw was a tired man finally confronting his failures. I'll consider it, I said finally. But I want full transparency going forward. More secrets, no more questionable deals. Agreed, Father said immediately. And I want a seat on the executive committee, I added. Not just the board. I want to be involved in major decisions. Father hesitated, but Alex nodded. That makes sense. You've got the most at stake now. I'll review the full audit report and consult with the financial advisors grandfather appointed, I said, standing to indicate the conversation was over. I'll let you know my decision within the week. As I turned to leave, Father called after me. Victoria, thank you for listening. I paused at the door. I haven't agreed to anything yet. I know, he said. But you could have refused to even discuss it. You're more like him than I ever was. It wasn't quite an apology, but coming from Richard Grant, it was perhaps the closest thing to an admission of respect I'd ever receive. As I drove away, I realized the power dynamics in our family had shifted irrevocably. For the first time, Father was coming to me for help rather than the other way around. The question now was, what would I do with that power? After a week of intensive meetings with financial advisors, trustees, and corporate governance experts, I made my decision. The approach would not be what Father expected, not a quiet cleanup operation that preserved his dignity while solving the problems he created. Instead, I formulated a strategic intervention that would address the company's issues while establishing a new order. I called an official board meeting, ensuring all members would be present. Father arrived looking more composed than he had recently, clearly expecting that I'd agreed to his proposal. Alex sat beside him, nervously adjusting his tie. When my turn came to speak, I stood and addressed the room with a confidence that felt both natural and strange, as if grandfather's spirit had somehow merged with mine. After careful consideration of the audit findings and consultation with financial experts, I'm prepared to make a significant capital investment to address the issues identified, I began. Father's expression relaxed slightly.
However, I continued, this investment comes with conditions.
First, I will be purchasing additional shares from the company treasury at a favorable rate, increasing my ownership stake to 65%, murmurs circulated around the table. Father's relaxed expression vanished. Second, I propose a complete restructuring of executive leadership. Richard Grant will transition to a non-executive advisory role with no operational authority or signatory powers. Now, wait just a minute, Father began, but Howard Sullivan cut him off. Let Miss Grant finish her proposal, Richard. The board needs to hear the full plan. I nodded gratefully to Howard. An interim CEO will be appointed from outside the company. I've already identified several candidates with strong turnaround experience. Additionally, a new CFO will be brought in to implement proper financial controls and reporting structures. I laid out the rest of my plan methodically: the timeline for addressing the Westridge debacle, the communication strategy for shareholders and partners, the governance reforms to prevent similar issues in the future. Throughout my presentation, Father's face cycled through shock, anger, and finally a grudging recognition. When I finished, the board chair called for discussion. Several members expressed support immediately, clearly relieved that someone was taking decisive action. Others raised questions about specific elements, which I addressed with the thoroughness grandfather had always valued. Finally, Father spoke. This plan effectively removes me from the company I've led for 15 years. The company you've mismanaged for at least 5 of those years, I corrected gently. This isn't punitive, Father. It's necessary for Grant Enterprises to survive and thrive. And if I oppose this plan? He challenged. Then I withdraw my offer of investment, I replied calmly. The audit findings become public. The regulatory authorities receive our full cooperation, and the company faces the consequences, whatever they may be. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the implications. You're holding the company hostage, Father said, his voice low. I'm offering it salvation, I countered, with conditions that protect it from further harm. Alex, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. Dad, she's right. This is the best option we have. Father's head snapped toward him, betrayal evident in his expression. I've seen the numbers, Alex continued. We can't fix this ourselves. And Victoria's plan keeps the family in control, just different members of the family. The vote, when it came, was decisive. The board approved my proposal nearly unanimously, with Father casting the lone dissenting vote. As the meeting adjourned, he stormed out without speaking to anyone. Alex lingered, approaching me hesitantly. That was impressive, he said. Grandfather would have been proud. Thank you, I replied, still processing the enormity of what had just happened. He won't forgive you easily, Alex warned, nodding toward the door Father had just exited through. This will feel like the ultimate betrayal.
To him, I know, I said.
But it was the right thing for the company, for Grandfather's legacy. And for Father too, though he can't see that yet, Alex added. This way there's no public disgrace, no legal consequences. He should be thanking you. I smiled wryly. I won't hold my breath for that. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. I worked closely with the trustees to implement the restructuring plan, interviewing CEO candidates, communicating with key stakeholders. and learning more about the business than I ever had before. Father remained conspicuously absent, having retreated to the lake house to process recent events. According to Mother, Margaret Chun, the interim CEO we appointed, proved to be exactly what the company needed: experienced, no-nonsense, and meticulous about proper governance. Under her leadership, we began the painful but necessary process of unwinding the Westridge acquisition, taking the financial hit but preserving the company's integrity. 6 weeks after the board meeting, I arrived at the office to find Father waiting in the reception area. He looked different, thinner, his usually impeccable appearance slightly rumpled, but his eyes clearer than I'd seen in years. "Do you have a few minutes?" he asked, his tone formal but not hostile. I led him to my office, grandfather's former space, which I'd initially hesitated to occupy, but now felt increasingly comfortable in. "You've made changes," Father observed, looking around at the room where I'd removed some of the heavier furniture. "And added plants and modern art." "A few," I acknowledged. "How are you, Father?" He sat heavily in the visitor's chair. "I've been better, also been worse." He paused. "I've been seeing someone. A therapist, I mean, your mother's suggestion?" This surprised me so much I didn't immediately respond. "He's helping me see some things more clearly," Father continued. "About myself, about how I've handled, well, everything." "That's good," I said cautiously. "I've been unfair to you," he said abruptly. "For years I resented your relationship with my father. I was jealous of how easily you earned his respect when I spent decades trying and failing." I remained silent, sensing he needed to continue. "I've made a lot of mistakes, Victoria, in business and family. The drinking made it worse, but it started long before that." He looked down at his hands. "I'm 30 days sober now." "One day at a time, as they say. Congratulations," I said sincerely. "That takes courage." He nodded, acknowledging the comment. "I'm not asking for my position back. You were right about that. I didn't deserve it. But I would like a chance to make amends, to be part of rebuilding what I damaged." I studied him, looking for the manipulation I'd grown so accustomed to detecting in his words. But his eyes held a new quality, a humility I'd never seen before. "What did you have in mind?" I asked. "I know the Jensen account better than anyone," he said. "They've been with us for 20 years. Margaret mentioned they're hesitant about continuing the relationship given the restructuring. I could help smooth that transition. It was a small offer, but a substantive one. The Jensen account was significant, and Father did indeed have the longest relationship with them." "I'll speak with Margaret," I said. "If she's comfortable with it, we can arrange something on a consultant basis initially." "That's fair," he agreed, then added, "More than fair, actually." As he rose to leave, he paused at the door. "Your grandfather would be proud, Victoria. Not just of what you've done with the company, but how you've done it, with integrity." The words touched me more deeply than I'd expected. "Thank you, Father." After he left, I sat quietly, absorbing what had just happened. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. There was too much history, too many wounds still healing, but it was a beginning. That same week, the business press got wind of our restructuring. Story: The Wall Street Journal ran a feature titled Grant Enterprises, A Family Dynasty's New Chapter, which painted a surprisingly sympathetic picture of our situation. Sources close to the company describe a thoughtful transition of power. "From the second to the third generation," the article read. While rumors of financial irregularities prompted the changes, industry analysts praised the transparent and decisive approach taken by Victoria Grant, granddaughter of founder Maxwell Grant. The media attention brought unexpected benefits. Other young executives reached out to share similar experiences of family business challenges. Business schools requested case studies. I even received an invitation to speak at a corporate governance conference. Through it all, I tried to maintain the perspective grandfather had instilled in me, that business was about more than profit. It was about creating value, providing livelihoods, and leaving a positive mark on the world. In my most private moments, I sometimes wondered if my actions had been driven partly by a desire for revenge, to show Father and Alex that I was capable of everything they thought I wasn't. But as the months passed and the company stabilized under new leadership, those Thoughts receded. This wasn't about revenge. It was about responsibility to the company, to its employees, to grandfather's legacy, and ultimately to myself. 3 months after taking control, I invited Mother to lunch at her favorite restaurant. She arrived looking more relaxed than I'd seen her in years. "The separation is working well for both of us," she said when I asked about Father. "He's focusing on his recovery, and I'm rediscovering parts of myself that got lost in all the drama. I'm sorry if my actions made things harder between you," I offered. She shook her head firmly. "Victoria, you did what needed to be done. Richard and I were headed for a reckoning regardless. This just accelerated the inevitable." "And Alex?" I asked. She smiled. "He's showing surprising maturity. The trust arrangement you suggested for him, having him earn increasing responsibility by meeting specific milestones, was brilliant. He's actually applying himself for perhaps the first time in his life." As our lunch concluded, Mother reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "Your grandfather knew exactly what he was doing when he put you in charge. Not just because you're smart and capable, but because you have the heart to lead with compassion, even when being firm is necessary." Her words echoed in my mind that evening as I prepared for a board presentation the following day. 6 months into our restructuring, Grant Enterprises was showing strong signs of recovery. Stock prices had stabilized, key clients had been retained, and employee morale was improving under Margaret's leadership. The media had dubbed me the reluctant heiress due to my initial career path separate from the family business. The nickname amused me. I'd never been reluctant about working hard or standing by my principles. But I have been reluctant to claim the power that came with wealth and position, unsure if I deserved it or could wield it responsibly. Now, reviewing the quarterly reports that showed our company turning a corner, I felt a quiet confidence. Not the brash certainty Father had always projected, nor the entitled expectation Alex had demonstrated, but something more grounded, the knowledge that I was where I needed to be, doing what I was meant to do. Grandfather had seen this potential in me long before I recognized it in myself. His gift hadn't just been financial wealth. It had been the opportunity to discover my own capacity for leadership, for difficult decisions, and ultimately for creating positive change. That night, I drafted an email to Father inviting him to coffee the following week, not at the office, but at the small cafe where Grandfather and I used to stop after our Sunday ice cream ritual. It was time for a new conversation, not about the past, but about the future we might build together differently than before. As I pressed send, I remembered that moment in the study when Father burned the check, and I simply smiled. It hadn't been about knowing there was a backup plan. It had been about recognizing that true wealth wasn't in that paper he'd reduced to ashes. It was in the lessons, the values, and the strength Grandfather had helped me develop over a lifetime. Some inheritances can't be burned, no matter how hot the flame. 1 year after the will reading that changed everything, I stood on the refurbished executive floor of Grant Enterprises, looking out over the city skyline. The company had not only survived but was thriving under the new leadership structure. Margaret Chun had accepted the permanent CEO position after her successful interim period. With me serving as executive chairperson of the board, the transformation went beyond financial metrics. We'd implemented Grandfather's long-desired sustainability initiatives, improved employee benefits, and established a foundation to support education in underserved communities. The corporate culture had shifted from the fear-based environment Father had created to one of innovation, collaboration, and integrity. "Miss Grant," my assistant Sophia's voice interrupted my reflections. "The quarterly leadership meeting is about to start." I nodded, gathering my notes. These quarterly meetings had been my innovation, bringing together department heads from all levels to ensure communication flowed freely throughout the organization. Today's meeting would include a familiar but still surprising face. My father. Richard Grant's rehabilitation, both personal and professional, had been a slow, imperfect process. After 9 months of sobriety and consistent therapy, he'd accepted a limited role focusing on client relationships where his decades of experience proved valuable without giving him financial authority. Our relationship remained complicated. But we'd established a careful professional respect that occasionally hinted at the possibility of personal healing. As I entered the conference room, I nodded to Father, who sat midway down the table rather than at its head, as he once would have insisted. He returned the acknowledgement with a small but genuine smile. The meeting proceeded efficiently, with updates from each division and thoughtful discussion of upcoming challenges. When Father spoke about the expansion of the Yenzen account, he did so with professionalism and deference to the process, a stark contrast to his former imperious style. Afterward, as people filtered out, he approached me cautiously. "That went well," he offered. "The European expansion plan is solid. Margaret and the team did excellent work on it," I agreed. An awkward silence stretched between us before he spoke again. "Victoria, I wanted to let you know I'll be attending the memorial service tomorrow, if that's all right with you." Tomorrow marked the 1-year anniversary of Grandfather's passing. I'd arranged a private service at the botanical gardens he loved, followed by the dedication of a new business scholarship in his name. "Of course," I said. "Mother mentioned you might come." He nodded, hesitating before adding, "I've been thinking a lot about him lately, about what he tried to teach me that I was too stubborn to learn." He met my eyes directly. "I'm trying to learn those lessons now. Better late than never, I suppose?" "I think he would appreciate that," I replied carefully. Father seemed about to say more, then simply nodded again and departed, leaving me with mixed emotions. His transformation appeared genuine, but years of manipulation had taught me caution. Still, Grandfather had always believed in second chances, cautiously given and carefully monitored. That evening I met Alex for dinner at a quiet restaurant downtown. Our relationship had undergone perhaps the most surprising evolution. Initially bitter about what he perceived as favoritism, he'd eventually recognized the opportunity in the structured trust Grandfather had established for him. "The vintage car restoration business is taking off," he reported enthusiastically over appetizers. "Turns out all those hours Grandfather spent teaching me about those old engines actually stuck." "He'd be thrilled you're putting that knowledge to use," I said sincerely. Alex's transformation had begun shortly after Father's ousting when he'd finally recognized the toxic patterns he'd been emulating. Free from Father's immediate influence, he'd found his own path. Ironically, by embracing Grandfather's passion for classic automobiles that Father had always dismissed as a wasteful hobby. "I've been offered a spot at the Barrett-Jackson auction next year," he continued. "That level of recognition in the restoration community is huge." "That's fantastic, Alex. Truly." He studied me for a moment. "You know, I resented you for so long. I was convinced you'd somehow manipulated Grandfather into favoring you." "And now?" I asked, curious about his perspective. "Now I understand he wasn't playing favorites. He was recognizing something in each of us that we couldn't see ourselves." Alex twirled his wine glass thoughtfully. "For you it was leadership. Ability. For me it was creative and technical skills I never valued because Father didn't." His insight surprised me. "That's remarkably self-aware." 2 years of therapy will do that," he replied with a self-deprecating smile. "Turns out the trust wasn't about controlling me. It was about giving me time to figure myself out without pressure." Our conversation continued,
touching on Mother's flourishing return to the art world as a curator, Father's ongoing recovery,
and the upcoming memorial service. For the first time in my memory, we spoke as equals, without competition or resentment shadowing our interaction. Walking home that night, I reflected on how much had changed. The family that had fractured so dramatically a year ago was reconfiguring itself into something new. Not perfect, but perhaps healthier than it had ever been. The memorial service the next day was everything Grandfather would have wanted. Dignified, but not somber, focused on continuation rather than ending. We gathered in the rose garden where he and I had spent countless Sunday afternoons, the October air crisp and clear. When it came time for me to speak, I looked out at the assembled faces: family, employees, business associates, and friends. "Maxwell Grant understood that true legacy isn't measured in dollars," I began. "It's measured in impact on people, on communities, on the future." He built a successful business, yes, but more importantly, he built connections. He invested in potential. He saw possibilities where others saw only obstacles. I glanced at father, sitting stiffly but attentively beside mother. At Alex, who nodded encouragingly. A year ago, we gathered to hear his final wishes. Some of us were surprised by his decisions. This earned a few knowing smiles from those familiar with the dramatic will reading. But with the perspective of time, I've come to understand that his final act was actually his greatest lesson, that wealth without wisdom is meaningless, and that true inheritance is about values, not valuables. After the formal service concluded, I slipped away to visit grandfather's grave privately. The simple headstone, as he had requested, bore only his name, dates, and the phrase, "He built more than he took." "We're doing well," I told him quietly, placing fresh flowers beside the stone. "The company is strong. The family is healing, slowly but healing nonetheless." I smiled, imagining his pleased nod. "I think you knew this would happen, that your decisions would force us all to grow in ways we'd resisted." A gentle breeze rustled the nearby trees, and I took it as his response. Back at my apartment that evening, I reviewed the notes for tomorrow's foundation board meeting. The Maxwell Grant Foundation had become my personal passion, using a portion of my inheritance to fund educational opportunities for students who, like grandfather himself, came from humble beginnings but showed exceptional promise. My phone buzzed with a text from Elaine Hodes. "First year review complete. All conditions met. Full control transfers to you tomorrow per the terms. Congratulations." The message marked the official end of the one-year supervision period grandfather had established. While the trustees had gradually given me increasing autonomy as I demonstrated capability, tomorrow would finalize the process. The responsibility was sobering but no longer intimidating. I poured a small glass of grandfather's favorite scotch, our ritual, and raised it in a silent toast. The journey from that shocking will reading to today had transformed me in ways I couldn't have imagined. I discovered strength I didn't know I possessed, wisdom I hadn't realized I'd absorbed, and the capacity to lead with both firmness and compassion. The path hadn't been easy. There have been sleepless nights, wrestling with difficult decisions, moments of doubt about my capabilities, and painful confrontations with family members. But through it all, I'd held to the principles grandfather had modeled: integrity, persistence, and the courage to stand firm when necessary. Father's burning of that check, his theatrical attempt to block my inheritance, now seemed almost comically futile, not because the money had already been secured through grandfather's foresight, but because the true inheritance had never been about the money at all. It had been about character, values, and vision, things that couldn't be destroyed by fire or spite. My smile in that moment hadn't been smugness or secret knowledge, though that's what everyone assumed. It had been recognition, sudden and profound, that grandfather had prepared me for exactly this test. That in trying to hurt me, father had actually revealed precisely why grandfather had chosen me as a successor. The following morning, I woke early and went for a run along the river path grandfather and I had often walked. The city was just coming alive, the sunrise painting the buildings in gold and promise. At our bench, I stopped to catch my breath and watched the water flow past, constant yet ever-changing, like the business he'd built and entrusted to my care. Life would continue bringing challenges. I knew the business world was unpredictable. Family healing was rarely linear and personal. Growth never truly ended. But I faced these prospects with a quiet confidence that had been hard-won through this year of transformation. The wealth grandfather had left me provided security and opportunity. But his greatest gift had been believing in me before I fully believed in myself. By seeing my potential and creating circumstances that forced me to rise to challenges, he'd given me something far more valuable than money. He'd given me the chance to discover my own strength. As I left the park and headed home to prepare for the day ahead, I thought about that moment in the study one last time. The shocked faces, the burning check, my unexpected smile. In the flames of father's anger, I hadn't seen destruction. I'd seen illumination. The fire hadn't consumed my inheritance. It had revealed its true nature. Some lessons can only be learned through fire. Some strength can only be discovered through challenge. And some smiles aren't about what's been gained, but about what can never be taken away. I'd lost my grandfather, but I'd found myself. And that, I knew, was exactly what he'd intended all along. Have you ever had someone believe in you when you didn't yet believe in yourself? Or experienced a moment when what seemed like a loss actually revealed something more valuable? Share your story in the comments below. If this journey of family healing and personal growth resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need this message today. Thank you for joining me on this journey of discovering that our greatest inheritance is often the strength we never knew we had.